Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and guests. Don't mess with taxes. Okay, you think I might have said Texas, but I'm talking about taxes. Okay, you don't want to mess with your taxes. And I'm going to do something here I haven't done in quite a while, and that's I'm going to share my screen and try and use visual aids as well as Andy did the other day. Although probably won't be as successful, but I'm going to give it a try. So I want to talk about a subject that we all live with, right? They say there's two things that are certain: death and taxes. I don't want to talk about death today because even though they might be, what is that word? Contiguous. We're going to go past that today and we're just going to focus on one half, okay? Because there is, I'm afraid, something called a death tax. We're not getting into that. You know, I started teaching over at the Yeshiva University, or excuse me, at Yeshiva High School of Greater Washington just recently, and I started teaching a course called Personal Finance. And I found out that things that I knew and took for granted, people just don't know. Okay, they're minors, they're 16, 17. What should they know about personal finance, let alone taxes? But the gulf of of not knowing some of the basics really startled me. And so I went and put together a presentation for them, and I thought I would share it with you as well. And I suspect you're going to find some things that you didn't know, and I'm going to try and make it exciting. I know we're talking taxes, I remember that. But I hope that you will pick up on some of the items here and find that they're going to be useful for you. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm hopeful that you are seeing that. You have the controls up there too, don't you? You see the controls there too? Oh, no. You see my screen?
No, we see your screen, but we don't see the controls.
Okay, great. So then I'm going to just leave them up there and we'll proceed from there. All right. So don't mess with taxes. I thought that you'd get a kick out of that, Jennifer, because you were in Texas and you saw that that was the motto, but it's appropriate here too. All right. So everybody has to deal with taxes. It's important for us to understand a little bit about. So let's see if I can illuminate a little bit for you. And now let's see if this works. There we go. Brief history of the U.S. tax system. Bet you didn't know that early on the federal government only had one way of collecting taxes, from tariffs and excise taxes. In other words, from consumption or from transportation. That's how the government was funded, was simply through there. However, later on in 1862, the federal government levied its first tax on income, and it was any income exceeding $600, which was a pretty hefty sum of money back then in the 1860s. They rescinded it in 1872. I guess people didn't like that. I guess people like their tea. Oh, that's a different tax. That was in Boston. Okay, the 16th Amendment, that was introduced in 1913 to pave the way for what we've all come to know and love, and that's our income tax. That's the initial income tax that we had, and it was on income over $3,000. So you can imagine that it took a bite because we're looking at 1913, $3,000 a year. That was a lot of money back then. It's not so much money now. Marginal tax rate was 77%. 77%. I bet you're wondering, how much taxes do you pay? What's your marginal tax? Do you know what marginal tax is? Do you know what your effective tax is? Do you understand the tax brackets? Well, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Toastmasters, we're going to take a look at some of that today. But first, we're going to take a look at the source of revenue for the U.S. government. What is our source of revenue? As you can see, the largest source of revenue is that individual income tax. 41.5% of the government's revenue comes from income tax. Corporate taxes is only 3.9%, which has been a source of of disdain for a lot of Americans that they don't pay their fair share. Property taxes. Now, we're not talking here about the just the national revenue. We're talking about state revenue as well. So you can see the state taxes, property taxes, consumption taxes. In case you don't know, every time you go to the store and you spend 6% here in Maryland, that's consumption tax. The state picks up that tax. It's sales tax. For social insurance, what are we talking about here? We're talking about your FICA taxes, right? And we're going to talk about FICA here in just a second. All right, so all the taxes are not imposed equally across all the states. For instance, there's no state income tax in Texas, no state income tax in Florida. That sounds good, right? And it can be, but it's a regressive tax that keeps the state going rather than a progressive tax. We're going to talk about that as well, because there is a big difference in the two, and there is a reason why one is better than the other. Maybe you've even heard of some politicians talking about a flat tax and how that might be the savior or the panacea for our revenue. And so we'll take a look at that as well. I hope that to keep you peaked there. Starting out with FICA. FICA, that is the Federal Insurance Contribution Act. Federal Insurance Contribution Act. That's your Social Security. That's your Medicare. Medicare is differentiated from Medicaid, right? Medicaid is a social program whereby people who do not have the means to provide their own medical insurance, the government will subsidize that. That's Medicaid. Medicare is something that you've paid into. Medicare is the insurance policy that you're going to have when you turn 65, or unless you're going to keep your other business-related, employment-related health care. So 65, you'll kick into Medicare. So here you can see that paid by employee and paid by employer. I happen to do payroll for my American Legion post, and so I see this each week. But did you realize that your employer is paying half of your Social Security tax, and they're paying half of your Medicare tax? You are being taxed 15.3% of your paycheck every month, or what it's 15% a year is what it comes on out to be. And so that from your gross taxable earnings. So in other words, before they take anything else on out, they're going to take out the Social Security and your Medicare. And when you're working for an employer, the employer pays 7.65% and you pay 7.65%. But when you own your own business, for instance, a free pizzeria or something, you have to pay your own employment, self-employment. So you're paying the whole enchilada. Well, not when you're in pizza. When pizza, you pay the whole pizza. So that's 15.3% you'd have to pay on your own, of your own volition. And by the way, you will have to pay that. In addition, you'll also pay a self-employment tax. So that's something to consider. All right, so this is normally talked about as a payroll tax. What's progressive and regressive? This chart kind of a little deceiving, I think. It says a progressive tax is one in which the upper income families pay a larger share of their income in taxes than those who have a lower. Whereas the regressive tax is poor and middle income people pay more or a larger share of their income than the rich do. So how does that work? Progressive, and we're not talking about political ideology here, okay? We're talking about how it works. So a progressive tax is the more you make, the more money you're going to be taxed for. So people who are making less money, they're going to have a lower tax rate than people who make more money. They're going to be paying more taxes. A regressive tax is when you don't base the tax on the income scale. And so therefore it's regressive in the fact that it's going to cost poor or middle class people more than it will cost rich people. Actually, it could be the same percentage, right? For instance, sales tax is a regressive tax. Why is it a regressive tax? Because I can afford to pay 6% or 9% on alcohol without impacting my income to any great degree, right? Because I'm making enough money to be able to absorb that. But somebody who is in a lower income bracket, they're still paying the same 6%. But they still have to pay for their daily livelihood, and their livelihood will also have it's taking a bigger bite out of their livelihood, out of their living expenses. Whereas my living expenses are not going to be impacted by sin. And Manash is saying, no, no, no. But that is the essence of a regressive tax. That's the essence of it, is that let's say it costs $20,000 for an individual to be able to sustain their livelihood. 6% of that $20,000 a year is going to hurt more than a person who has $100,000 a year and they had to pay 6%. They can still sustain. They're still going to have more than $20,000 to control their lifestyle. So that's something to consider. Where does this money go? I was surprised to see that 27.1 cents of every dollar goes to health. Military, 17.8% or 17.8 cents. Interest on the debt is currently 12.9 cents of the dollar. But that's going to change, right? Because right now we're approaching an area unknown before. We think that climate change is impactful. Wait until we see what happens with the debt. So interest on the debt is also having a pretty big impact on us. Education, not as much. And by the way, when we're talking about education, we're talking about in here, elementary, secondary, higher, you're talking about the whole gamut. The state takes care of the local schools, and the federal government takes care of the higher Pell Grants, the higher education areas. Unemployment and labor, veterans benefits. Veterans benefits, I should believe, should be a lot higher, but it's not. I guess I'm partisan. And food and agriculture, but that's not all. We also have transportation. Right now, we're seeing a real need for transportation. We all saw what happened in Philadelphia with the collapse of the bridge when they had a truck burn up underneath it. Government, just law enforcement, justice, and so on, is only 3 cents on the dollar, all the way down to science. And science is a scary thing because if we don't keep our lead there, we're having a real issue. So, having said all of that, how do we figure it out, that tax? And this is what I didn't really understand, and I think a lot of people don't, and I hope to enlighten you. How do you calculate that tax? Basically, you go by the income bracket that you have times the tax rate, okay? And that gives you the tax that's owed. So your income within a bracket. So you'll often hear people say, I'm in the 22% bracket, or I'm in the 26% bracket. And that's all well and good, and people are talking right. But what does that mean? A 10% bracket is saying that, and this is, by the way, this is the brackets for this year. A 10% bracket says the first $11,000 you make as a single individual is going to be taxed at 10%. If you're married filing jointly, it's going to be the first $22,000 that you make. And if you're the head of a household, which means that maybe you have parents that you're also taking care of, an extended family of sorts, you're going to have the first $15,000, $700 is going to be 10% tax. The second part is the 12%. So if you're single, and let's just keep going down to single. You're single, you're making $64,000 a year. What that means is the first $11,000 is going to be taxed at 10%. The second group is going to be taxed at 12%, and that's going to be the 44,725 minus the 11 you already paid, right? And then 22% on the remaining income, right? Because you're making $64,000 a year. You're going to be paying what bracket? You're going to be in the 22% tax bracket. But that is not your effective tax bracket. That is the marginal tax bracket. Your real tax bracket is going to be determined this way. So take a look at what we just did. You have $64,000 in taxable income. 11,000 is going to be taxed at 10%. That's $1,100. The next grouping, okay, which is going to be the 44,725 minus the 11,000 you already paid or they already taxed. That means you're going to be paying 12% of that amount, and that's going to be $4,047. Then you're going to take that $44,724 away from the 64,000, which is how much you are actually being paid. That's your income. You subtract that, you're going to pay 22% on that amount. That means you're paying $4,241 for that grouping. Your total income tax is $9,388. That is not 22% of $64,000. That is only 14.67% of the $64,000. So you might be in the 22% tax bracket, but you're actually effective. Your marginal tax bracket or tax is only 14.67. This is a progressive tax. The more you make, the more you're going to be taxed. And this is, to a lot of people, the fair way of approaching taxes. Now, of course, when you take a look at taxes, it's really hard to be fair. I think that is the last of that. I can stop the share. So when you're talking about taxes, there are a lot of things to consider. And one of them is to be understanding what is actually happening with your tax dollars. I think that you will agree that a lot of the tax dollars are being spent for the public good, and it's important. And there are areas that we can definitely improve upon, but we certainly want to be able to take care and have a functioning government providing for the general welfare. And I'm not talking about welfare as a social program, but I'm talking about the general welfare of the country. Are you frozen? Okay, no, okay, I see you're moving. All right, I have a lot of things going on the screen here, so it looked frozen for a second. I apologize. So taxes, it's not something that you want to mess around with. It's something that we all live with until the day we die, including after death with the death taxes. But there are different ways to look at it. And I'm not trying to convince people that taxes are good, but they are inevitable. And so, therefore, a better understanding will certainly help you in your daily life. And if you can pass this along to your children, that would also be, also you should be passing along your income, but realizing that estate tax is also, and never mind, I digress, which is not the same as progressing, but I'm going to finish here and say thank you very much. I hope I didn't tax you too much, and have a good evening.